Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, we're looking at governments and the media. Starting with election time in Iraq and the new rules the authorities have in store for journalists there. The Afghan government bans live news coverage of attacks in the name of security. Italy takes on Google,
violating the country's privacy laws,
and struggles to cope with the impact of new media. And in our web video of the week, one sick rapper down under.
Sitting here and pondering my own impending doom.
The global news media had a big story to cover in Iraq this past week, the national election, the second in the country's post-Saddam Hussein history. Although the hazards of reporting from Iraq have diminished over the past 2 years, journalism remains a dangerous occupation there. But that did not stop the story from being reported by the multitude of media outlets that have sprung up since the 2003 invasion. Television stations, radio stations, and newspapers that would never have been tolerated during the Saddam era. The government has said it wants to help the media, and it has put a new journalists' protection law before Parliament. The question that journalists are asking, however, is whether this law will protect them or will it protect those in power from the prying eyes of Iraq's new media outlets. Our starting point this week is Baghdad, a contentious piece of draft legislation and its potential impact on the Iraqi media scene, which is itself a work in progress. As they scan their new media landscape, Iraqis are under no illusions about what they see. They know the channels covering the election had their favorite candidates, as did the newspapers. That is not to say there is much nostalgia for the old Iraqi media model, the way things used to be under Saddam Hussein.
Before the regime change in 2003, journalism as we know it in the West did not exist in Iraq. Reporters were really not reporters. Their sole duty to either praise the regime or condemn its enemies.
In 2010, Iraq's media do what most media around the world do. They reflect the society they cover. And war-ravaged Iraq, with its Sunni, Shia, and Kurdish populations, is a chaotic, factionalized place.
The political democratization process always translates into the multiplication of media outlets. We've seen that all over the world, and it's an excellent indicator of how country is moving through the democratization process. Now, it raises its own challenges, and it certainly did in Iraq.
After 2003, we witnessed a surge in the number of outlets. Most of these were either privately owned or owned by different newly organized political parties or the old opposition parties. We had roughly some 400 new newspapers, more than 60 radio stations, and more than 50 TV stations.
The media enjoy complete freedom to work, but there are political pressures to which they are subject from one direction or another. There is indirect governmental interference, whether it be domestic or foreign.
On the domestic side, there is a new law currently before Parliament called the Journalists' Protection Law. Some of the provisions are welcome, such as the right to freedom of expression, compelling the government to investigate crimes against journalists, and providing pensions to the families of any journalist killed. But critics also see many shortcomings. The law does not recognize bloggers as journalists, so it affords them no rights or protection. It would require all journalists to join the Iraqi Journalists Syndicate, effectively making their names public. And the wording is vague, banning journalists from inciting sectarian violence and forcing journalists to reveal sources, if doing so would prevent a crime, without stipulating that the crime would have to be a serious one.
It prevents broadcasters from reporting on events which may be inciting violence, but there is no definition of what that means. It requires broadcasters to seek permission to report. Again, that's an impediment to their ability to work. It also requires broadcasters to give a list of their journalist staff, something that many journalists in Iraq are very concerned with, because the memory of the killings and of the violence is very near. And being public about being a journalist can actually be too often a cause of harassment, and in the recent past, a cause of death.
This law forces the journalist to reveal the source of his information, to reveal the identity of his informant. Even if a traffic policeman were to tell him his work affects the national interests, that he should not take pictures or write any words, and he should withdraw, he would. This law does not protect the journalists, it terrorizes them.
Iraqi journalists certainly do need protection. The casualty rate has fallen over the past 2 years, but according to the New York-based Committee to Protect Journalists, 140 media workers have been killed in Iraq since the 2003 invasion. At least 89 of them were targeted. Another 57 reporters have been kidnapped, and the vast majority of those killed or abducted have been Iraqi. Given that scary statistical backdrop, it is not surprising that the Iraqi Journalists Syndicate, which pushed the government for some kind of safety measures, sees the legislation as a positive step.
Where is the harm in a journalist gaining his rights? It is not a privilege. It allows a citizen to have a plot of land, free healthcare, it protects the citizens during their work and brings them peace and security. So it's not a privilege or an honour bestowed by the state on the journalists. It is one of their rights.
On the contrary, governments often use the pretext of national security to constrain journalists. Sometimes a group of soldiers walk alongside journalists to allegedly protect them, but they want to hear what they're saying. This law hinders the work of the media. It empowers the government against them.
This is an important time for the Iraqi media. They have evolved from the Saddam Hussein era, suffered through terrible violence, and are in no mood to have a new media law imposed by a government that journalists say failed to consult them about what the law should contain.
There are many things that a law of that nature can do, but it needs to do that in consultation with the professionals. It needs to do that by looking at best practices outside Iraq. It needs to do it certainly taking into account the international standard on freedom of the press.
So that the Iraqi media can continue to evolve by getting the legal protection they deserve while keeping the freedoms that so many journalists have paid for with their lives. Here's how our Global Village voices see the Iraq story.
The proposed media protections law in Iraq is intended to protect journalists. However, for it to succeed, it needs to also protect journalists from defamation lawsuits, which have become incredibly common over the past few years in Iraq.
The importance of the free media needs to be supported by the government. The simple fact that one must register to be recognized as media can undermine the rights of the free press altogether. While every country has a different way of supporting or managing this, protecting the press is an important part of keeping a government in check.
The new media protection law is a bit of a misnomer. It's a media control law in some respects. The devil is in the details. It contains penalties for incitement to sectarianism, but I strongly suspect that some people might think that if you pointed out, say, that the Kurds really wanted to secede, or the Shia were actually controlling Baghdad, then this will be regarded as incitement by the people you're talking about.
Anyone can become one of our Global Village voices. All you need is a webcam or a camera and a relevant point to make on the world of media. The best way to get in touch is through Facebook and Twitter. Look for the Listening Post page on those sites, and we will let you know what stories we're working on. Or you can reach us through our email address, listeningpost@aljazeera.net, anytime you want to get with the program. Our News Bite segment this week is heavy with news and news coverage from Afghanistan. You can count the United States government amongst the critics of a new media policy announced by the Afghan government to ban live television and radio coverage of militant attacks in the country. The ban was put in place this past week by the National Directorate of Security. A spokesman there said journalists help inform the enemy with their live broadcasts or reporting of the progress of police operations. Afghan journalists quickly denounced the policy, saying it would deprive the public of vital information affecting their security. The American envoy to Afghanistan, Richard Holbrooke, also announced his opposition to the policy, saying that the U.S. does not like restrictions on the press. Holbrooke signaled that he would raise the issue with the Afghan government. A gag is also being put in place on the British media on some of the reporting that they've been doing on the military side of the Afghanistan story. The British Ministry of Defence, the MOD, wants to ban reporters from embedding with UK forces once the election campaign in Britain starts, probably later this month. Embedded reporters live on bases or with military units. They provide one-sided reporting, but it's a safer way of covering an otherwise dangerous story. The MOD wants embeds banned during what it calls a politically sensitive time. British civil servants have traditionally been banned from making political comments during election campaigns, but that policy, known in the UK as PERDA, has never been applied to the coverage of the military. Prime Minister Gordon Brown is being pounded on this in right-wing newspapers in Britain. They've accused him of using British soldiers as political props during his recent visit to Afghanistan. The violent fallout continues in the Central American country of Honduras following last summer's coup. The voice you hear is Carol Cabrera, a Honduran journalist for Radio Cadena Voces. She is broadcasting from her car. The next sound you will hear is gunfire. Cabrera was wounded, but a broadcaster traveling with her, Joseph Hernandez Ochoa, was killed. Ochoa hosted an entertainment program on television, Channel 51. Carol Cabrera is outspoken and controversial. The motive behind the attack was believed to be her strong support for the coup that led to the ousting of the democratically elected Manuel Zelaya and the installation of Roberto Micheletti. The media divide in Honduras between the political left and right was split wide open by the 2009 coup, with supporters on both sides waging attacks on the press. And the social networking site Facebook is proving to be very useful. You can get in touch with long-lost friends, upload photos, or find out what the Israeli military is up to. According to its own radio station, the Israeli army had to call off a raid on the West Bank after one of its soldiers posted details, including the time and place of the raid, on the website. The strategically challenged soldier, whose name has not been released, wrote that on Wednesday, we clean up Katana, and on Thursday, God willing, we come home. He put that on his Facebook page along with some other crucial information. The soldier was relieved of his combat duties, court-martialed, and jailed for 10 days after he was reported to the military authorities by what Facebook likes to call his friends. We're back after the break with a look at Italy, where the government and the courts are taking on some of the big players from the world of new media. Welcome back. Italy is turning into a treasure trove of stories about the media. There's the Silvio Berlusconi saga. As Prime Minister, Berlusconi controls 3 state-funded television channels, and as a media baron, he owns another 3 stations. There are the new rules that the Berlusconi government wants to impose on websites, regulations that have not been well received by new media types. And then there's the legal case that Google just fought and lost in Milan. The case centered on a video that some people found offensive, a boy being bullied, and 3 Google employees have been convicted of violating Italy's privacy laws by posting the video without the permission of the people involved. The 6-month jail sentences were suspended, but the court's message was inescapable. Google, YouTube, and companies like them are all legally responsible, at least in Italy, for what shows up on their sites, no matter how quickly they take the material down. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on the controversial case in Milan and the Italian approach to dealing with the legal complexities of the World Wide Web.
3 Google executives convicted in Italy of violating the country's strict privacy laws.
Google's acidic response to the ruling from Milan.
We believe that it poses a crucial question for the freedom on which the internet is built. None of these 3 employees had anything to do with this video, and yet they have been found guilty.
On 24th February, Italian judge Oscar Maggi made internet legal history. For the first time ever, Google was found responsible by a court of law for content posted to one of its sites.
The judgment is quite surprising because European legislation is supposed to protect companies like Google that host third-party content from what that content is.
Many hundreds of thousands of images are loaded every day. People access it from all around the world. There's no way that any company could properly or reasonably monitor that kind of material.
We're definitely surprised by the verdict, but understood as a part of a pattern of courts really applying metaphors to the real world that actually just don't apply on the internet.
Well, in Italy, there is a law protecting the privacy and dignity of the individual. And this is a law meant to punish anyone who produces content that infringes upon such privacy and such dignity. The problem is that these are legislations made before the coming of the internet. And these are legislations that are impossible to implement in the age of 20,000 videos being uploaded every minute on the internet.
We can't show you the video at the center of this legal case, since Google took it down in 2006. The company says it did that immediately after a complaint from the Italian police. The video showed an autistic boy being bullied and had been online for 2 months. The court ruled Google should have been aware of the offensive nature of the content much earlier, especially since users had commented on it.
So Google had been saying it had removed the content within 2 hours of being told about it. What the prosecution had alleged was that Google should have known about the content for 2 months.
People like Google are incredibly diligent about removing illegal content. Up to 90,000 infringements of copyright which have been removed within an hour by Google. Now that's a pretty impressive kind of statistic.
That is the case now, but this ruling goes back to what happened in 2006, when online video sharing was just taking off. Since then, the mechanisms for dealing with complaints have been improved. For Google, however, the 2006 case could not have gone to court at a worse time.
In Italy, it is beyond doubt that we have a very critical moment for what concerns freedom and pluralism of the press. The liberty that is given to the televised channels, the television, as well as the newspapers, in fact, is under an increasing threat by the actions of the government of Berlusconi. In all of this, the internet has played the role of the animator of social agitation lately.
In October last year, thousands of Italians took to the streets to protest their prime minister's control of so much of the country's media. Since then, Berlusconi's political opponents have used Facebook and other new media outlets to arrange successive protests. And in the past few months, a series of laws relating to new media have received parliamentary approval in Italy. Many of them have direct implications for online media in the country. Silvio Berlusconi's political opponents say there's little coincidence that the government is moving against new media at a time when the web is becoming a valuable political tool for the opposition. One proposed law would have forced websites posting videos to register with the government and vet all copyrighted material before posting it. Another draft law would have forced bloggers to correct any inaccuracies within 2 days or face huge fines. Both laws were watered down before they received approval, but it was a signal to Italy's online activists that their work is seen as a threat.
It's important to note that Berlusconi comes from a large, big media empire background, and that some of this attitude reflects the distrust of the freedom and openness that is on the internet and the difficulty of controlling in a centralized way.
And that issue of rules for the World Wide Web is at the heart of the verdict from Milan. Google certainly has its view on the verdict.
If this is let to stand, we believe that it would threaten the very freedom that the internet has brought about. The freedom that we know, the web we know, will cease to exist. And these are important points of principle.
But for governments, the challenge is in trying to get a global internet to adhere to local laws. For companies like Google, the challenge is to run an international operation while dodging various legal grenades thrown by different countries.
If you look in Europe as a whole, though, there are directives in place to protect companies like Google. Now, the emphasis of that legislation is different to how it is in America, for instance. In America, they're more bothered about free speech and less about privacy.
In Italy, there is a very strong attention to the dignity of the person. What is required is to come up with a jointly agreed code of conduct on the internet and very clear guidelines that service providers can follow wherever their practice is taking place.
And in the absence of clear guidelines, companies like Google could once again find themselves subject to the laws and the courts of countries like Silvio Berlusconi's Italy.
More Global Village Voices now on the media story coming out of Italy.
Rather than trying to legislate the internet, we should be focused on building a better understanding, on the one hand, among internet users of how to share media responsibly, how to think about privacy and protecting human dignity, and a better understanding, on the other hand, by the internet sharing sites of how they can respond promptly to human rights concerns. So sometimes that means taking down footage as quickly as possible if someone's dignity or safety is compromised. But sometimes it also means keeping up critical evidence of human rights violations, even if that material is violent or disturbing and might not otherwise meet their content guidelines.
President Berlusconi and his family control a large portion of the media, including 3 television channels. President Berlusconi also has a comfortable relationship with the Italian judicial system. He has rarely been charged when taken to court and has never fulfilled any punishment when he has been convicted. The lesson to take from this is important. We cannot expect to have free speech on the internet if we allow large chunks of the internet to come under the control of one corporation, one family, or one person.
Finally, Christian Van Vuren is an Australian who, at last word, has been quarantined in a hospital in Sydney. According to his Twitter page, he's got a drug-resistant strain of tuberculosis, which can be very serious, or it can be funny. If, as Van Vuren has done, you take all of the downtime that quarantine affords a hospital patient and start rapping about your condition. He's getting hundreds of thousands of hits on YouTube. When you watch our web video of the week, keep in mind that in the world of rap, sick is a double entendre. It can also mean cool. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.
Last time we caught up, I told the world about how I got sick. Well, now, my friends, I'm back again, and I'm fully sick. Fully sick. They let me out of hospital because they thought I was better again. But that created a monster. I got even sicker than I was back then. Heaps sick. So all up now, I've spent 7 weeks locked up here in this room, sitting here and pondering my own impending doom. I'd like to think that nothing's changed and that mentally I'm okay, but doctors keep on telling me that I'm acting kinda strange. Quarantine could make you crazy, but that hasn't happened to me. I wish that I could say that for Bone Face and Deputy D. Hello. Now they've got me on 6 different drugs with assorted side effects, but none that I know of yet. They also put a tube in my arm so the drugs can go in here. But it doesn't work so well when I stick it in my ear. Uh-oh. Quarantine could make you lonely, but that